Hello, my name's Neil. I'm from Tin Man Games. We're a indie development studio based in Melbourne, Australia. As you can tell, I'm not Australian myself. I actually moved across to Australia 3.5 years ago. Set up the indie company with a friend of mine, Ben Britton, who's still working over there. And I'm now back over in the UK for a couple of years for a couple of personal family reasons. But I'm still part of the company, and as you'll see, I'm kind of still running things from over here and still making the most of getting around to events like this and meeting people like you, because it's good. You know, I was once part of the UK games industry, and so it's kind of nice to be back here and kind of, you know, put myself in front of the local scene over here as well. So I'm going to do a presentation today. This is actually a bit of an old presentation. It's from earlier on this year. I actually gave it to the International Game Developers Association of Melbourne as a presentation. So a lot of things in here they're meant to be aimed at people that know us, because we're quite well known in the Melbourne scene. So there's a lot of kind of small in joke stuff that will go straight over your head, but it doesn't matter.
You tell us when to laugh.
Yeah, okay. I'll hold up a little piece of paper. So this is kind of like a 2-year post-mortem of what's been happening for us. So what we do, so I've brought a couple of banners here. We create these products called Gamebook Adventures. Now Gamebook Adventures are basically choose your own adventure, you probably remember, fighting fantasy, as your Brits will definitely remember because they're quite popular over here, Lone Wolf, those kind of books. Basically we decided that with the advent of new digital devices, the iPhones, the iPads and all that kind of stuff, it would be quite good to bring interactive fiction back to get new audiences. So you know, you've got your nostalgic 30-something-year-old males, kind of me, kind of most of you, who would have read this stuff when you were at school, when you were kids, and we're trying to get you back because you're the guys with a disposable income. You're out buying iPhones and iPads, but then we also wanted to attract new readers. So you've got the kids that are playing World of Warcraft, the kids that have watched 3 Lord of the Rings films and been blown over by the fantasy. So we're trying to get this whole kind of new generation of kids getting into interactive fiction as well. They weren't even alive in the 80s when this stuff was big. So, kind of good. So currently we've got 7 books on the App Store. Therefore, iPhone, iPod Touch, and iPad. It's a universal. So if you buy one, it works on all the devices, but it's specific to each device. So this is basically a little bit of backstory about me and Ben. So this is me playing on my ZX Spectrum 48K, circa 1985, I believe. There's an Input magazine. I don't know if you remember Marshall Cavendish's Input magazine down before. And this is Ben. So Ben, conversely, Ben is an American. So there's an American and an Englishman in Australia making the company, which is kind of one of our things that we do. So Ben was on stage at this point, being actor lead. This is kind of where we are now. This is actually a photo taken of us in Boston. That's actually being photoshopped. We can actually walk around with these around us. This is where we want to be in a few years' time. So I just want to give you a bit of a backdrop about me and about Ben, just to give you a bit of perspective of where we've come from, to sort of see how we've got to where we are. So my background is product design and visualization. I did it at Bournemouth University. I graduated in '99 down there. I was doing a lot of 3D CAD stuff. I did a year out in industry and went to work in a company in Melton Mowbray doing virtual reality. So I got into 3D in a big way. I then got into 3D modelling and animation. I did a lot of historical reconstructions. I did lots of 3D models of buildings that aren't actually around anymore. Like I did Glastonbury Abbey and various things like that. And then I got into a game studio. I worked for 3 years just up the road in Razorworks that were based in Kidlington, near Oxford. I then left and went freelance, and then started my own little company, a UK company called Fracture Studios, which is basically an extension of my freelancing. So what would happen would be, I would be sat at a company freelancing, building some stuff, and the CEO of the company would go, "Hey Neil, do you know anybody that can do some textures for some of our cars?" And I'd go, "Yeah, here's an email address, get in touch with them." And I thought, shit, I could be making a bit of money off of this. So, because I had lots of contacts, and so I started up Fraction Studios. So instead of when the CEO came to me, I'd say, hey, what I'll do is I'll get in the whole of your art team. I'll do all the art for your project for you. I'll charge you, I'll bill you, and I'll pay those guys separate things. So we did this for a few years. We worked on some really good projects. We kind of got well known for doing Need for Speed. So a lot of UK companies a few years ago were doing all the Need for Speed ports for DS, for all various different mobiles, PSP and various other things. And so I would basically go around all these companies and haul myself out and say, hey, Need for Speed, you've got it? We just worked on the last one, hire us. So that's how we kind of worked there. And we ended up working on a bit of Grid, did some other EA stuff like Tiger Woods and various other things.
Which year? Which PGA Tour?
Which one?
The date was covered up.
It's 09.
Oh, 09, fair enough.
It wasn't a very good one, actually. 10 was the best one, I think, the one that came off. And then, so me and my wife decided to move to Australia, and about a week and a half before I left the UK, I got called into a studio, again in Oxford, it all revolves around Oxford, as a company called Exion. And I'd done a lot of work with them, and they said, hey, we've just signed up PlayStation 2 and Wii conversions of the new Need for Speed Undercover, because the PS3 and the Xbox 360 versions were getting done stateside, and so they needed somebody over here to do the conversion. Can you do it? I'm moving to Australia in a week and a half. Did you know that? So I said, yes, okay, I'll take on the project, and I'd been to San Francisco to the Game Developers Conference. If anybody you've been to the game, it's brilliant. If you can save some money, go across 1 year. It's awesome. Such a great thing to go to as game developers. And I met an Indian outsourcing company there. Just had a business card that some guy I met in a meeting room. And so I rang him. I said, look, I need 10 artists for the next, 4 months. So he said, yeah, no problem, we'll do it. So they got on and did it, and they did a lot of conversions for us, and I moved over to Australia, and I was managing the project while living in a camper van, but that's another story. And about halfway through the project, they basically didn't deliver the quality that I was after. So I had to kind of say to them, I'm really sorry, but this isn't going to work, and I had to find another studio in Melbourne to do it. And so there's a company called 01 Animation in Melbourne who are awesome. They basically gave me a studio with 10 artists and hired all them to finish off the project. So it was all kind of good. And it was kind of good for me because I'd just arrived in Australia, I didn't know anybody, and within a month, baptism of fire, I suddenly knew all these Australian cool animatory games development people, and it was really cool. So it kind of really worked for me. A bit about Ben. Ben's actually very well known in Melbourne. It's a bit of a running joke. Ben actually has won an Academy Award. And so when this appeared in front of people in Melbourne, they kind of got a big cheer because they all know he's Academy Award winner Ben Britton. That's a joke. So Ben's background is originally was web stuff, and then he got into the film industry. He did a lot of sort of working in special effects departments, doing various things, sort of physical work, sort of lugging around cameras and fog machines and various things. And then he was also always coding, and then he got into a thing called Spidercam, and Spidercam's the thing that got him his Academy Award. And Spidercam is the thing that's being used, here's another picture of it here, in a ton of films, one of which was Spider-Man, which I've just shown you there. And so basically what Spidercam does is when you have a piece of film footage which is going to have CG attached to it, the Spidercam records all the camera points in space, and so creates a 3D representation of those points so that when a CG artist is creating the 3D models, they can do all the stuff to do that thing. And there's just a bunch of films he's worked on. Mission Impossible, Spider-Man 2.
Elf? That had Spidercam in it, did it?
Was it?
Elf.
Elf apparently has Spidercam. And the best one, this is the best one, and this is, I tease him about this, Beverly Hills Chihuahua. That should go at the top of his CV, I think.
And Stuart Little as well.
I think there is Stuart Little. Maybe. Yeah, there's Stuart Little too. So, but the thing that's most important was Ghost Rider, because Ghost Rider was actually filmed in Melbourne. So Ben found himself in Melbourne shooting Ghost Rider, and then he fell in love with a local Melbourne girl and hasn't left Melbourne since. And then I come along a few years later, and we get chatting, and we start Tin Man Games. So then Ben, once he was in Melbourne and he'd had enough of the film industry, he started developing some of his own apps, which weren't very successful. He's quite happy to admit that. They didn't sell very many copies. He needed something new to do, so he kind of joined on to me. So it's just a kind of a little bit of a timeline of stuff. So how are we funded? Because basically we're just hobbyists. I don't see myself as a big company or anything. We're just two guys just trying to make it go a bit. So how are we funded? So I had a bunch of savings. A fair bit of that savings was recouped off of that last Need for Speed game, which I was just telling you about. A lot of in-kind, which I mean by that is me working till 4 o'clock in the morning for weeks on end and not really earning any money from it. Fraction Studios, which was my outsourcing, I was having a little bit of extra residual work coming through, which I was paying. The big one for us was Film Victoria, who, if you watch any Australian films, Film Victoria fund a lot of films over there, but they also fund games companies as well, which is really great. So they gave us a bunch of cash. It wasn't tons of money. It wasn't, we weren't suddenly, woohoo, we're rich. But in fact, I never saw much of that money. That money went on paying other people to help us develop our games. So, but it helped out an awful lot. I mean, it was important. Again, this is part of Fraction as well. I kind of did some other little games in Melbourne. We worked with a local developer, again on Need for Speed and Sims and various things. And then obviously our sales of our books that are interactive game books that come on there, they also fund the company. And then Ben did an awful lot of work. Ben's the coder. He's the brains behind the team. He built our engine. He did everything, and a lot of that was done in his own time for pretty much zero money. So how do we work currently? We work from home offices because we're not a big company. We want to keep our overheads down. Skype, MSN, iChat, we do all that kind of stuff. This is just some stuff with Ben putting a face. So one of the things this is actually just before Ben joined me, is I was working with another coder, and the iPhone had just appeared, and I thought, hey, the iPhone's out, like all these developers are making these cool games, they're selling for $1, they're selling 1 million copies, they're making $1 million, right? That's gonna be awesome. Let's do this thing. So I created this game called Fruit Trees, which was a bit rubbish. So just to give a rundown, I probably invested about $15,000, and the total income from Fruit Trees has been a bit higher than that. It's probably about 1.1k now.
just ticking along.
Yeah.
A couple of sales every month.
That's right, literally. Although we did a Halloween version, and it was because we had a company in London porting it to Android for us. We got like a 50-50 deal with them. It got featured on the Android store for Halloween, and I made like 600 quid on Halloween. I went and bought a new widescreen telly. So, but yeah, it is literally 1 or 2 copies a week. It's like ridiculous. So listen, it was a failure. That's not a way to make money on the App Store.
And are you saying that was near the beginning of the App Store's life as well? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, that was pretty near. It was kind of in the first year.
Because it's more of a problem now, is it, for marketing and going to
yeah, well, back then, you see, we all thought we could make it, and then very quickly we learned, actually, it's a little bit harder than that. And just going, but why did it fail? Very little marketing, right? I did none. I thought, hey, I can make this game, put it up there, and people are going to buy it, right? It's got fruit in it. The name of the game, there's a game that came out at the beginning of the lifespan of the App Store called Flight Control. Does anyone remember that? That was made by a Melbourne company, and I went to a talk with the guy that made that game, and it was great because he basically admitted that he wasn't really sure why it became big, and that had to give a talk on why it became big. But one of the things he did say was that he thought the name was really important that the name reflected the game. So Flight Control, you kind of know you're going to be controlling planes, and you're going to be landing planes. It's kind of like air traffic control thing. Fruit trees, what does that bring to your mind? Nothing, really. So It was too kiddie, but the gameplay was actually quite complex, so kids were finding it too difficult to play. Adults weren't buying it because it was too kiddie. So who was our market? We didn't know. I wanted it to be like Loco Roco, it so wasn't. Very little marketing. So it was back to the drawing board. I was $15,000 down, and which was pretty much most of my profits that I'd made off the last few years, and so I was pretty disappointed. But I thought, how am I going to create something that's actually going to work? So the way Gamebook Adventures came about was I was trying to think of a game to bring out where I could get bang for my buck, so I could have very little investment, but I could get as much as I could from that investment. So having something like a game book, the actual engine that runs that game book is the same in all the game books, right? But the content is different each time. So that investment on the engine is the thing where all the money's gone, and that's just it's actually not as simple as that. It's actually, it evolves, and it's actually been quite expensive. But that's the idea. It's basically, it's a better business model than Fruit Trees, way better. And I wanted to work on something that I knew, and I loved fighting fantasy books when I was a kid. It was a big thing for me. I wanted to avoid a hit-driven cycle, so I didn't want to just release a $1 game and in the first week hope to sell a million copies, because it's very rare that you get. So I wanted to get one. And most importantly, I wanted to build a brand. I wanted to build something which, my aim then was, wouldn't it be nice if when people in 10, 15 years' time talk about interactive fiction, they go, hey, you remember Choose Your Own Adventure books? Do you remember those fighting fantasy books? I remember that Gamebook Adventures series that appeared on iOS. That's where I want to be. I want to be sat up there with those names, and as I'll show in a little while, we're kind of achieving that. Bang for buck engine, I've already mentioned that. Exploited gap in the market. Nobody was doing this stuff on iOS at the time. There was a few people doing it badly, and I wanted to create something that was polished. And then I also wanted to learn how to market. I wanted to, I'd been working for clients, so I was working for people that spend like EA, Need for Speed. They spend millions of dollars marketing Need for Speed. So I'd never had any experience marketing, and all of a sudden I had to learn how to market, so that was important. So what is Gamebook Adventures? I think I've pretty much gone over this. Choose Your Own Adventure, Fight Fantasy, all those kind of books. So we're basically bringing it out for new platforms, so iPhone and iPad. So some of the key things that are important to us is that we have flowing narrative. So all our stories, we try and make it so actually every time you read it, it's a brand new reading experience, but it feels like a reading experience. I don't want it just to be like a text-based adventure game where it's, it kind of be a bit jarring. I actually want it to feel like a book, like an actual story. So the narrative has to be really strong. Obviously we have interactive choices. We have anything between about 2 and 8 choices on one of our pages. And I wanted all the links to be dynamic. So, I just want you to click on the link to go to the next page. So the other important thing, and because we're kind of following the kind of more fighting fantasy route rather than the Choose Your Own Adventure route, is we wanted dice battling in there. We wanted to try and attract the RPG crowd. So, and also the iPhone and the iPad have a wonderful thing where you can actually move stuff by moving the phone around. So I thought, well, hey, why don't we, waggle the phone or the iPad around and actually roll the dice on the screen? So that's one of the things. So we actually built our own physics engine where dice bounce around the screen. And actually, on the iPhone version, you cut to a separate screen where the dice roll around. On the iPad version, the book that you're reading, the dice roll on top of the book. So it actually does feel like you've got a book on the table when you're rolling dice on top of the book. So, we also wanted other things, like at the front page of any kind of game book, you have a really cool character sheet. Or when you play D&D, you have a character sheet. Character sheets are really important about you identifying with the character and having an inventory and all that kind of stuff. So we wanted that to slide on. We wanted bookmarks. We actually wanted a bookmark to appear in the book. Silly little things which make people feel like they're reading a book. And then I wanted polish, so we wanted to have some really cool menus. So we got some nice sort of 3D rendered menus. And because I'm a 3D artist at heart, it was a cheap thing for us to do because I could do it all, because it was something I was kind of good at. And then also important, we wanted achievements. The kids out there these days, they've got Xbox 360s. Achievements are huge, so we needed to have some achievement system. And I think one of the ways that we did that was not only by having little side missions in there, but by also incorporating illustrations in there so that you can unlock the illustrations as you go through the book We kind of collect it as a kind of photo album. So, and the other important thing to me as well, and if you're into adventure games, I think, and if you're into, are you guys role players, D&D, that kind of stuff, or have been in the past maybe? So I'm really into building a world and getting people to invest in that world and wanting to be part of it. So this world here, all our 7 books so far are all based in this world. All the writers write within this world. And this world was actually created 20 years ago. I was a dungeon master for an AD&D 2nd edition game. And I created this world. And so when we first started working on this, I thought, we need a world. And I thought, wait there, I've got a world. So I went up into my parents' loft, pulled down a box, and there was my world, all ready to go. And actually what's happened now is the writers have actually taken that world on themselves, and they're actually creating that world for us, as they write. Which is kind of cool, really. It's like just, having people actually designing your world for you. Cool. So again, this is a little old. There's actually 7 titles out now. We go for $5 on the App Store. We're universal, because we're a very niche market. A lot of games sometimes release a HD version for iPad, and so you have to buy it twice if you've got an iPhone and an iPad. We're so niche that we don't want to piss our fans off, so we kind of, we say, once you've bought one, that works on all of them, and that's kind of really worked so far. That's not in the submission anymore, that's been released a long time. We're actually, Book 7's been released, we're actually about to release Book 8 in January. But that was Book 6, The Wizard from Dark. So this is just a little thing about sort of game development, and this might apply to any of you games actually, guys making games. This is what I used to think game development was all about. Hey, you've got a coder, you've got an artist, you've got a designer. If you're making your own games, you're probably all 3 of those things all at once. And then you kind of go, actually, if I want to make money from this, I've got to do some business stuff. So you start a company, or you go, you get all your tax stuff together, and you go, a bit of business stuff. Actually, and that's still not a good business model. This is the business model for us. So this is like, if you want to actually make money and be commercial from your hobby, because I still view it as my hobby, this is where you need to be. And on any given week, I'd pretty much say that I'd say 75% of my time is marketing. Like just being here today is marketing, I suppose, in a way. I'm on Twitter all the time. I'm going up. We were at Dragon Meet the other week. We did PAX this year. Do you know PAX, Penny Arcade Expo? We did the Seattle and Boston one. We're doing them again next year. I've got the UK Games Expo next year. I've just come back we did a show in Australia recently. And so basically all the money we're making, because we're not making an awful lot of money, right? I'm basically ploughing all the way back into marketing, because what's going to happen is I'm hoping that this will steamroll to a point where we've built our brand up, and so people will recognise us. So we won't need to we've already got a presence then. So if you guys have got games and you're thinking of doing it commercially, marketing, seriously, just get on it in such a huge way, like you wouldn't believe. Like bigger than you think you're doing it now. Like just showing it off a few places and maybe doing a business card and having a website is so not enough. You've got to do more. You've got to think a bit sort of more out of the box and kind of really push yourself out there. So how have we marketed Game Book Adventures? So we promoted the brand first rather than the books. So Game Book Adventures everywhere. Everything's about Game Book Adventures. And it's that name, Game Book Adventures. An adventure game, it's game books, right? And so we keep hammering that all the time. We've got a blog which we try and maintain. I try and put at least a couple of posts a week, and we talk about us, what we're doing. There's videos of us being interviewed, there's silly pictures of us doing stuff, there's announcements. I do sneak peeks of artwork coming out in future books. Forums, I'm on the forums all the time. Twitter, I'm on Twitter so much. We've got, I think over the last 18 months, we've got about 2,500 followers just by building up our Twitter fan base. And we find now that a lot of people on Twitter are marketing for us because they love us so much. They're our fans. So they're actually getting our message out there without us even having to pay them money. Building relationships with journalists, which is actually super important. There's a lot of game sites out there, and it's trying to find the game sites that have got the most visitors and getting in touch with those people. So for example, on iOS, Touch Arcade's the big one, Pocket Game is the big one. So I've actually met up with those journalists. I've actually had a beer with them and talked to them and shown them and sat down. And, and like with a Pocket Gamer, Pocket Gamer is one of the biggest mobile sites in the world. It's a UK site. And one of their key journalists, like as soon as I email him, he'll email me back within the hour now and either say we haven't got time to put that press release in, or will email me back and go, I've forwarded it on, so whatever. So it's important. And also kind of more mainstream stuff, like we've got featured in The Guardian and The Age, which is an Australian newspaper, which is kind of similar to The Guardian. So it's important to kind of get out there into the mainstream as well, as much as possible. Press releases. If you're releasing any games and you want to, it's a really good site, gamespress.com. Just register it, write a press release. As soon as your game's finished, get the press release up on there, because what happens, Gama Sutra, Develop, all these kind of websites, they go to this site and they harvest press releases and they'll put it up and you'll suddenly find yourself being featured. And what will happen then is you might be on Gama Sutra for a week and there might be a journalist working for a website, just poking around the internet looking for a story to write, and you might go, that looks interesting, I'm going to write a story about that. And that's happened a few times where a journalist will contact us. For us, promo code giveaways are quite important. We have a lot of that. We encourage our fans to communicate with us, so I answer every single email that I ever get sent. Trade shows, which I've already gone into, like GDC, PAX. We've also got like a little news feature in the app, so when you load up the app you can find out what we're doing, what the latest release is, and all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of see that we're on the up. So we're actually producing a game book which will be released in April next year on Judge Dredd, and we've got a crack team of Judge Dredd experts writing the game book, doing the illustrations for the game book. They actually worked on the Judge Dredd role-playing game. And so my job over the next year is to get more stuff like that and just to keep building our brand and stuff, and also release our own stuff as well. So that's it, really. Cool. So if you've got any questions or whatever, just ask away.
I got one. Very early on in it, you said you worked with virtual reality. What was that all about?
It was a government agency in Melton Mowbray. They spent a ridiculous amount of millions of pounds installing a Silicon Graphics VR centre, and it's kind of research and stuff. And I was doing product design. I got brought in to do product design. I ended up doing virtual prototyping, so I'd create 3D models and would take the clients into a room and they'd be able to actually take the things apart and do all that kind of stuff. Very early days, it's kind of lawnmower man
sounds cool.
period. It's a bit ahead of its time really, but it was awesome.
That's good. And you also...
Is this your full-time endeavour now, or is it still a side, have you still got a fraction?
Yeah, so the fraction stuff, I did my last project on fraction about 3 months ago, and I've kind of said that's my last, I hope. But I am 1 day a week teaching down at Bournemouth University. So I'm still doing a little bit of work, like getting the money in. But I mean that 1 day a week barely covers my petrol there and back, to be honest. So it's
You mentioned earlier that you decided not to go for the Kindle version. Was there a particular reason for that?
There's a few reasons for it, some of which I can't really go into. But basically, publishing in Kindle, you can only publish in the US. So one of the problems with only publishing in the US is really that we need a US company. Setting up a US company costs money. We've already got an Australian company. I'm already over here in the UK doing. I think it's complicated enough as it is without all that kind of stuff. So, and also, our worries were justified when we wanted to try and make it into. Don't just think about just think about the lot, but you've just got to think about everything, like the thing. like you've got to look, like for example, like fruit trees, hey, I'm going to make fruit trees, release it. Nothing happens, right? Whereas Game Book Adventures, it's all about, it was kind of a thing where I just looked down and thought, do you know what? I could be doing this for the next 10 years. And I actually planned out where I'd be in different years. And I think that's kind of the way you need to look at it. It's think bigger. Think more than your game. Think about your brand. Think about where you're going to be in 2 or 3 years' time. Think about the sequels. Think about the knockoffs. Think about the brand itself, like the game. Like if the game is a certain kind of game, if it's I don't know, sci-fi game, look around for other people doing sci-fi games that have engines that do other things and say, hey look, my game's awesome, it tells a great story. If we made it in your game type, so I'm a point-and-click adventure game, you're doing an interactive book, why don't we cross-promote? You know, you've got to think bigger and, you know, really court the journalists, really talk to journalists and get to know them. And go to big events. Don't be worried about spending a few £1,000s and flying across to America, because that's where your biggest market's going to be, across there. You've got to sell it to all these loud Americans. I can say that because I work with an American. And he's very loud. So, just
think outside the box.
Yeah, well, it's just think beyond this one, because everybody thinks about you, because you're, as a game developer, you're obsessed about your game. It's got to be perfect, it's got to be brilliant. And it's actually not about your game, it's about you, it's about the people that work with you, it's about the name of your game and the brand and where that game could lead you in other directions. It's,
They talk about IP a lot these days, don't they? I mean, a lot of talks that I go to, they say, like, all indie developers have got, basically, is their IP. And if you can't have your IP, it's almost not exactly not worth getting started, but like, it's what you need, like, to think about consolidating. That's all, because that's your long-term investment. It's all about IP, isn't it?
Yeah. Why am I in this? Trees on my
How long is the development cycle on each of these books?
Oh, I got asked similar. It's difficult because we've been. It took us a long time to develop the engine. We released the first couple of books where the engine was in various states of undress, and it wasn't until really we got into book 3 here that we kind of really settled down to stuff. So this is really, I'm really passionate about kind of adding all this extra stuff in, because I think a book is quite a cold thing, really, reading, So to add in all this kind of, more cinematic-y type things with the sound, like we have a soundtrack playing through our books as you're playing. You can turn it off if you want, and like the music goes up tempo when you get into a dice battle. The music changes, it gets up tempo because it's like, oh my god, I've got to kill the giant rat. I've got to kill it.
It's like emotional engagement, isn't it? And it's another device to up kind of engagement with the product.
And it's kind of saying, look, we've got a digital device now. Like in the old days, you just had a book and your own imagination. We can actually give you more. There's more opportunities. So let's add it in next, throw it at you. Always give them an option to turn it off, because people sometimes don't want to hear the soundtrack on repeat. I quite like it. And the other thing, marketing-wise, we did a silly little thing. This went viral a little bit. We basically hired a TV studio for an afternoon. It's a guy that I knew from various social meetups.
Who's that?
I don't know. Scruffy bastard.